Well, hello again. My name is Sydney Winston. I'm an atheist activist out of Vancouver, Canada. I bet you thought you'd gotten rid of me, considering that I just finished a live stream less than 10 minutes ago. But I can't stay away from you guys. I love you so much. Okay. Get serious here. As I said, I wasn't going to bring you that proof number 2 today. Maybe I'll still do it later on today, but I came across something really, really interesting. And it kind of follows up on my previous stream with proof number 1 that God is imaginary. Myth Vision podcast, run by Derek Lambert, does great work. I really think you should subscribe. He's got lots of good stuff. This one in particular caught my eye. I watched a little bit of it and I thought, hey, people have to know about this. People who follow me on YouTube have to know about this. And so I'm bringing it to you. Dr. Mark Goodacre has written quite a few books. 3 of them, one called Thomas and the Gospels, one called the Synoptic Problem, and the third one, The Case Against Q, which are highlighted on the screen here. Without messing around, I think I'm just gonna get into it. The video itself is 20 minutes long, approximately, and the stream will be at least 20 minutes long as well, not plus the interjections, etc., etc. So if you guys are all ready to get into it, I think that's what we're gonna do.
Professor Goodacre, Francis Hill Fox, Professor of Religious Studies. I apologize. I don't know why I always get goofed up there. Did Paul exist? I know this is something that you're like, what in the world? There are people out there who legitimately think that Paul's letters are completely epistolary fiction, including the 7 authentic, for their own. I think there's some reasons behind. There's probably biases is why. Let's divorce him from historical verisimilitude here or something. Did he exist? Give us a few points of why.
It's always a difficult one, isn't it? It's a little bit like conspiracy theories about the moon landing. That you say, well, did the moon landing actually happen? The number of people who would have had to have been involved in that conspiracy about the moon landing is so many, and the number of people that would have had to have lied all of these years, it's absolutely flabbergasting that no one would have broken that kind of line. If someone says, all right, fair enough, we did it in a warehouse out in Texas somewhere, And it's a little bit like that with the idea that Paul didn't exist. It is actually far simpler to believe that a real human being named Paul, who came from Cilicia, actually wrote those letters. I mean, if you think about the logistics of trying to do that kind of fiction, you're not just writing those letters as pieces of fiction. You are recreating a story. You're creating a story in the background that then this fictional writer is having to respond to. So there are cycles within cycles that you have to get to do this, and then you have to bear in mind that there are all sorts of other people mentioned in the letters who are historical characters. It's a little bit like when you do the kind of did Jesus exist thing, that if you say Jesus didn't exist, you then still have to ask the question, well, what about Cephas? Did this guy exist? And if he didn't, who did the fictionalizing and when, you know? So I am a great believer in Occam's razor. Occam's razor, sometimes people misrepresent it as the simplest hypothesis is the best. That's stupid. It's not true. Simple is better than, you know, complex. History is complex. Sometimes, you know, there are layers and layers and layers. But Occam's razor is that you don't multiply entities unnecessarily, right? And I think when you get into the idea that Paul didn't exist or that Jesus didn't exist, what tends to happen is you are multiplying entities like crazy to try and explain the extant literature. The simpler hypothesis here is that there was a human being named Paul, and it's such a gritty and an earthy story as well. Not that I mean, you can write fantastic earthy gritty fiction, obviously, but there is a verisimilitude in Paul's letters that is not born of fictionalizing, it's born of history, it seems to me.
I totally agree with you. You brought up Jesus. Mm-hmm. I was hoping to ask a separate, but it's important because this one, I think you would agree to this. The reason why this can become a more difficult question, and I'm with you on Occam's, in fact, I apply the same thing, and that's what's made me a historicist and lean that way. I entertain, I listen to mythicists, you know, I consider what they say, but at the same time, like, I have really basic, I know if someone will go, that's not evidence. Guys were crucified. Like, you don't have to say he's in heaven being crucified by demons.
Right.
Elaine Pagel's book on the origin of Satan, she points out, like, every time you see Satan or demons and stuff, there's always humans involved, especially within the context. There's always a human. They're either working for the devil or Satan entered him or get behind me, Satan, all these contexts. So there's reasons behind why it seems most plausible for sure, Paul. But Jesus is shrouded in this thing where most people go using a historical method, right? I love your thing on the empty tomb, but we're not going to go there because I think it's like you don't even have to say that there's an absolute miracle here to still say something could be going on here. And I say that to say, like, you might draw a different conclusion, but walking on water, these type of things, right? They'll go, all of these added things and elements, using a historical method, you can't prove that. And in fact, they'll say, this is elements of myth. This is elements of potential fluff, if you will. It takes them away from history. It takes them away from reality. And therefore they go, there's so much myth. There's not a guy. But then people like Dr. Eerdmans go, come on, guys. Like, you're doing yourself a disservice. So what evidences make it pretty clear on like a common sense approach without ad hoc propositions why there was a historical Jesus?
Well, I think one of the ways that I'll put it is that you have to ask, what kind of evidence would you expect for somebody like Jesus? In other words, why do we think Pontius Pilate is a real person in history and not someone made up in the literary sources? Because we've got coins that say Pilate on it. Because we've got a dirty great step which somebody found at Caesarea that's got Pilate written on it. So we know that he's a historical figure. But of course he was a political figure. The kind of person that did mint coins and that did have his name written on big steps. Jesus isn't like that. Jesus isn't minting any coins. He's not leaving behind any clay tablets or
he may not
anything
have
like
been
that.
Able to write.
Right.
John 8's
he writes in the ground in John 8, but that's it, yeah. In Luke 4, he seems to be able to find his way to Isaiah 61, which is quite amazing there.
So he might be able to read at least.
I mean, Luke thought he could. It's interesting that in Mark's Gospel, you don't have Jesus, reading out loud from anything. So it may well be that Mark is depicting Jesus as at least less literate, if not illiterate, because he does have these characters, the scribes. There's a great book by my friend Professor Chris Keith, and it's called Jesus and the Scribal Elite, and it looks at the way in which the Gospels actually contrast Jesus with these characters that keep saying scribes all the time. Anyway, what I was going to say is that Jesus is not the kind of person who you would expect to leave behind actual artifact that we can then say, here's the. So the only way that somebody like Jesus lives on is in people's memories, in the traditions that they're sharing with one another, and in writings. So if we ask the question, have we got that kind of evidence? Yeah, we have. That's what Paul's letters are, that's what the Gospels are, and so on. That's what you would expect to have. It isn't, I don't think, a rational position to say, well, I doubt the existence of this person because we don't have any of that kind of material that we have when it comes to Pontius Pilate. And let's face it, there are all sorts of other characters that we don't have that kind of evidence for as well. What about John the Baptist? Mm-hmm. John the Baptist didn't mint any coins.
He gets a reference in Josephus.
Right, he gets a reference in Josephus. But maybe Josephus was making that up. I mean, he wasn't. He wasn't. But you can always do that. So what about Theudas? What about the Egyptian? These other people that Josephus mentions. Did they really exist? I mean, I think they did. I think that they certainly did. But did they leave behind any? Did they mint any coins? Did they have their? Do we find a big step with them? Of course not, because it's not the kind of evidence you would have. So, a lot of the time you have to say, what does it mean to do ancient history? And when you're doing ancient history, what you're doing a lot of the time is you are dealing with your lack of evidence. Every day when you're doing ancient history, you wake up and you say, there is so much I don't know. There is far more I don't know than I do. And the thing that's valuable about mythicist scholarship is it does put you in touch with the crisis of being an ancient historian, which is you have to keep saying, I don't know. I mean, one of the things when I do my Historical Jesus course is I have to really underline for students and have this conversation with them about how little we know about all sorts of things. So, for example, who was Jesus' biggest influence when he was growing up? We have no idea whatsoever. We can guess that it was maybe Mary or Joseph or maybe, when he started following John the Baptist, maybe it was him, but we don't know. I mean, maybe there was, it was Rabbi Nathaniel, at the Nazareth synagogue. We just don't know. We have no clue, not the faintest idea, And that's just to take one thing. We could go on like that all day. I mean, everybody thinks with great confidence Jesus was a carpenter. Well, how do we know that? One offhand remark in Mark chapter 6, which says, is this not the workman? Is this not the craftsman? Something like that. And then for centuries, we have Jesus as the carpenter. Even things we think we know, we're not quite sure exactly, how precise, they are. Maybe they were being sarcastic. We just don't know. So I think the value of some mythicist scholarship is it reminds us of how little we know. It reminds us of the nature of the sources. And I always like to contrast ancient history with modern history. If you're writing a biography of Donald Trump, not something I would enjoy doing, but if you wanted to write a biography of Donald Trump, your problem would be too many sources. You have got so much material. You have got how many videos to plough through and tweets, living relatives, people that know. You would never get through even a tiny amount of the material that you would need to get through to write that biography. That's the problem of being a modern historian. The problem of being an ancient historian is the exact opposite. It's that our sources are so limited and so few. And that means that sometimes the accidental nature of remains, of historical remains, distorts our vision because some things just survive because of happy accident, And so we can then start thinking that is representative. And it's like when we were talking about Paul. The fact that Paul wrote letters means that his legacy survives. And the fact Luke loved him, and he writes all of that stuff in Acts of the Apostles. Apollos, we might never have known about if it wasn't for the fact that Paul mentions him in 1 Corinthians and Luke mentions him in Acts. Just a couple of mentions. We don't know much about him at all. How many other people are there like that in early Christianity that people just forgot to mention?
And they may have been very influential.
Right, highly influential people. Yeah, exactly. It's why I actually quite enjoy counterfactual history sometimes. I've written an article about Mark's Gospel, which tries to imagine a world without Mark. What would have happened if Mark's Gospel had never been written, And the reason why it's worth doing that is that sometimes when we approach history, we do it in this... We kind of assume that there's an inevitability about history, that there's a sort of fixed side to it. We get quite fatalistic about it. And sometimes you have to remember it's so contingent. What if the guy that grew up to become the author of Mark's Gospel had actually died when he was a teenager? You know, what if he wrote the Gospel and very quickly it got lost, you know? I mean, it's good to ask the what-if questions, I think, you know, because it stops us from thinking that the history that we've got is the only possible history, because it's not.
It is amazing, and I think there's a whole other world that, and I'm going to speak for the skeptics myself, and I've caught myself doing this, is I feel like sometimes we don't give... Maybe we mistreat the text like we wouldn't treat another document because there might be a chip or it's a religious document, and it's like we deal with fundamentalists or Christians who proselytize us in a... It's not like someone who's just a man of faith or something, but like they have a agenda and a mission, and it's annoying, and they're like aggravated, so they take it out on the book or the text, and so what happens often, I think, is sometimes we're too skeptical with the very book that we're trying to figure stuff out. Don't get me wrong, maybe being cautious is important. I feel the same thing with the groups that try to identify that these are Israelites throughout the entire New Testament that are getting salvation. Yeah. Cornelius was an Israelite. You didn't know that, but only Israel gets salvation. And therefore, it's all these ethne or Gentiles must be Israelites. And they go to Revelation 7, 144,000. They equate that group with the same group after. They say they're the same group. The great multitude, every nation, tribe, kindred, and tongue, they say they're the same. Therefore, they're all 12 tribes. That's it. And they do that, and it makes me really want to probe into the history. They divorce history. They don't really go and say, let's look at history. They say it's fictitious, like the epistolary fictions of Paul and all that. But it drives me to want to know more, and so I'm thankful for them. And when I was a mythicist, I hear interpolationists. In fact, earlier when you mentioned in our other recording, you mentioned Paul says that the judgment on the Jews will come. Well, that to me immediately, coming from full preterism, which is a whole thing we don't even have to talk about, but also as a mythicist, I said, that's the Jerusalem destruction. Duh, that's 70 AD, because they got the wrath of God. How's that not in my mind? And it could be, don't get me wrong, but do we have to draw that conclusion? And why am I drawing those conclusions? I don't have certainty on that. I just have to make an assumption. Some groups, for example, go to 2 Peter 3 when he says the elements shall melt with fervent heat. Well, when the temple got burnt and the elements of the religious practice of Judaism were burning, you see how far they go? That's not actually cosmic. It's just the temple being destroyed. And I'm with you on this.
Well, on the issue of skepticism, the difficulty is that for every historian, you have to have a healthy dose of skepticism and bring it with you to the texts, because that's just how the historian naturally will work. I mean, if you think of the opposite thing, that you went with credulity to everything, you're not really doing history then. All you're doing is some form of fundamentalism. So every historian has to have in their armour that bit of skepticism. And when I say skepticism, I mean in the broadest sense of taking an inquiring critical mind and asking questions like, why do I think that's the case? What makes me think that that's the case? Beginning from this thing again of, I am confused. Sometimes just say this. I mean, the reason why I basically questioned the existence of the Q document it wasn't because I was on some sort of mission to, take this beloved text out of the scholar's armour. It's just that I kept looking at the arguments for it and I think, it just doesn't make sense to me. I just thought, no, it just doesn't. They said, well, Luke could. I mean, because the obvious things, Luke looks so like Matthew. I'm thinking, well, surely, this guy can't be this guy. No, he can't have done because of. And then the reason would be something like, because nobody would have destroyed the Sermon on the Mount. And you think, well, every person that's ever interpreted it throughout history has done something with the Sermon on the Mount, like rewritten it a little bit, changed it a bit. Why wouldn't when the first interpreters have done that, when it wasn't even that, august a text? So I think this is really where, I have some sympathy with the mythicist position, because I think what you do when you're an ancient historian is you actually do have to keep saying, why do I assume that this is the case? Is this the case? Ask those kind of those difficult questions, because sometimes you'll actually discover that received opinion is wrong, you know.
So I love that. You just said a gold mine of something, and I want to speak on the other half because I was a mythicist. I understand why they're mythicists and totally respect it. I also want to say I'd like to see more less derogatory view from both historicists, especially the consensus, on mythicists. However, the mythicist I would be speaking to here saying, please, guys, don't be dogmatic. You don't be so certain he didn't exist.
Right.
Stop oh, that's not evidence. What if it is? You might be throwing out something that could be. Be more flexible.
Right. Do you know, I'll tell this story against myself. Many years ago, I was teaching a historical Jesus class, and I would hardly give any time at all to the mythicist position. And I said, in passing at one stage, I said, well, you know, why would you invent something like Jesus coming from Nazareth? You know, who's ever heard of Nazareth? You know, that looks like a kind of a historical detail. And one of the students in the class said, yeah, but what about Robin Hood coming from Sherwood Forest? Who's ever heard of Sherwood Forest? Well, I have, because I'm from, you know, I support Nottingham Forest football team, and, you know, that's related, you know, but not many people have heard of Sherwood Forest, right, except in connection with Robin Hood. And this student said what happens quite often with a mythical figure, with a legendary figure, is they are associated with some unusual, never heard of before place. It goes back to this whole thing of kind of having some degree of kind of mystery and secrecy about the figure that then is unveiled. So I stopped saying stupid things like nobody would have made that up, because it's quite clear that you often have legends and myths where, and I don't know, to be clear, I don't think it was made up.
Right.
I think Jesus was associated with Nazareth, and I think the fact that Mark calls him Jesus the Nazarene, in spite of the fact that Jesus seems to live in Capernaum in Mark's Gospel, it's like, what's going on there, kind of thing. But so I do think there was a historical place, Nazareth, and that Jesus, you know, was probably brought up there. I think that's the best explanation of the data. But I don't any longer use that as an argument.
Yeah, I just want to interject here on that Jesus of Nazareth thing and the Nazarene. I understand from what I know about the New Testament, or about ancient Christianity, is that before Christians were called Christians, in the very, very early days when they were Jewish Christians, they were called Nazarenes. A Nazarene, back in ancient times, 2,000 years ago, was simply a Christian, before the term Christian actually became a term that we associate with believers in the fake mythical Jesus. So I just thought I'd throw that in there so that you could be more educated. Off we go.
For his existence, as it were, you know.
I like that. You could see growth and development.
You should. I mean, it's one of the things that I think is really, really helpful as a scholar, as a student, is constantly to challenge yourself and to ask why do I think I know this, right? And I agree. I think a lot of my colleagues, especially those that are, you know, got nice kind of tenured jobs, will be very disparaging about the mythicist position rather than engaging it. We were talking off camera earlier on, but I've got an article coming out soon called "How Empty Was the Tomb," and the very first footnote in that article is to Richard Carrier. So, you know, and I'm certainly not afraid to allude to the work of people like Richard if you know he's got something good to say, which in this context he has. You know, so
wow.
You know, I think that is a healthy attitude for anyone.
Wow, thank you.
So there you have it. What do you think? Do you think that Jesus existed? Do you think that Paul actually existed? Because we don't know. And that actually prompted a thought in my head. Because regarding the letters and the epistles in the New Testament, some are regarded as original and some are regarded as fakes. So I want to know, the ones that are regarded as original, where are the original documents so that we can test the documents for originality or fakery? It's a question I've never really thought to ask. I've never thought to pursue, and now I'd like to know. Maybe I'll find out when I go to the chats. Maybe. Let me go have a look. Okie dokie then. To the chats I go. And as such, I would like to welcome Shaq Otang. Welcome, my friend. How you doing? Cryptomeria. Hello. Good to see you again, as always. Artangelo, you're here, dude. Artangelo, seriously. Thanks for watching. But how do you answer the question of the epistles, and how do you know which ones are fake and which ones are not fake? Where are they, so that we can make these determinations? Can you please answer that? And I'm just going to scroll down. Okay, there's only really two. Okay, we have two in total. 2 viewers in the chat. 3 viewers in the chat. Cryptomeria, Artangelo, and Shakotang. Thanks, guys. Thanks for watching. Thanks for joining. Thanks for participating. So, Artangelo, can you answer me that question? I don't know if you're still watching, but you can answer the question any time you like. So there you have it from Dr. Mark Goodacre. It is quite possible that proof number 2 that God is imaginary will be following fairly soon, like tonight. So don't go to sleep. Set your alarm clock for 15. No. What's the time? 6. I probably won't do it for another hour or 2 if I do it at all. So I probably will. I kind of set my mind now to do proof number 2 because the first one was pretty short. I'm assuming the second one's going to be the same length. So maybe I'll do 2 or 3 in one day. Separate shows, of course. But nevertheless, I do thank every single one of you for watching. I hope to see you again in the very near future. Thank you again. And this music will take you out. Good blues tune, a good blues progression.